Good morning and welcome. Today I'd like to talk to you about George MacDonald as a philosopher of human selfhood, of human existence. In the last talk, I spoke about George MacDonald as a great philosopher of the will. And we have to remember, of course, that MacDonald is not an academic philosopher and that he never pretended to be a philosopher. I believe that we can take him seriously as a philosopher and that we should. I've recently enjoyed Dean Hardy's book, Waking the Dead, where he does exactly that. But it's important to understand that there's no easy way to pigeonhole MacDonald into a particular philosophical school of thought, and that we shouldn't try to do that. It's easy for MacDonald scholars to emphasize the influence of Plato on MacDonald's thought, and this is certainly indisputable. In the first talk, I mentioned MacDonald having some of his noblest fictional characters carrying around a volume of Euclid with them wherever they go and proving a theorem or two whenever they had a chance. Well, when they're not carrying around Euclid or the Greek New Testament, they're carrying around a treasured volume of Plato, also in the original Greek, of course, and reading in it whenever they have the chance. And the way that MacDonald talks about this makes me think that this was MacDonald's own practice that he approves of in his fictional characters, that this was one of the ways in which he kept his mind sharp and nourished his own soul. I'd like to highlight one particular passage in the Unspoken Sermons in which we can see the influence of Platonism and Neoplatonism on MacDonald's thought very clearly. And this is from his sermon, The Hardness of the Way. Let me read it here. Possessions are things, and things in general, save as affording matter of conquest and means of spiritual annexation, are very ready to prove inimical to the better life. The man who for consciousness of well-being depends upon anything but life, the life essential, is a slave. He hangs on what is less than himself. He is not perfect who, deprived of everything, would not sit down calmly content, aware of a well-being, untouched, for nonetheless would he be possessor of all things, the child of the eternal. Things are given us, this body first of things, that through them we may be trained both to independence and true possession of them. We must possess them, they must not possess us. Their use is to mediate, as shapes and manifestations in lower kind, of the things that are unseen, that is, in themselves unseeable, the things that belong, not to the world of speech, but the world of silence, not to the world of showing, but the world of being, the world that cannot be shaken and must remain. These things unseen take form in the things of time and space, not that they may exist, for they exist in and from eternal Godhead, but that their being may be known to those in training for the eternal. These things unseen the sons and daughters of God must possess. But instead of reaching out after them, they grasp at their forms, reward the things seen as the things to be possessed, fall in love with the bodies instead of the souls of them. And this is from his sermon, The Hardness of the Way. So you see there his emphasis on the opposition between the world of the phenomenal world, the things seen, and the eternal world, the world of the things themselves, the eternal world. And the idea that all the things in the phenomenal world have their souls, their true beings, in the eternal world, the world of God's thought, and that our purpose as human beings is to learn from the things of the visible world, their true natures, and come to grasp their true natures and become true ourselves, become closer to the divine thought of us, which is our true being, hidden in God and in God's thought. And I think that the influence of Plato there is very clear. But Dean Hardy, in his book, very rightly points out that we can't overemphasize the influences of Platonism as if that were MacDonald's only influence. And he speaks of MacDonald, following others who do so, as a great sacramentalist, as someone who is interested in, who has a very positive view of our participation in the visible world and sees the purpose of God in mediating the knowledge of himself to us through our real lived experiences in the real physical world. And this is true. And I think that even beyond this, it's important to understand MacDonald as a great synthesist. That he is someone who has, through his very wide and deep reading, gathered from a great and diverse multitude of sources. And he's brought them all together in his own lived experience and forged this profound, original, creative synthesis. It's not just a mashup, an undigested mishmash of his influences, but that is an organic whole, the fruit of his long-lived effort to be true as a human being and his dwelling and meditating on these great thoughts from all ages. We could spend a lot of time exploring what you could call MacDonald's Platonist side, but today I would like to explore what I would call his existentialist side. I would like to think of MacDonald as, in a way, an existentialist. Certainly not an existentialist in the sense of the 20th century atheist existentialist, but an existentialist in the sense that the term has been retroactively applied, for example, to the great Danish Christian philosopher of the 19th century, Søren Kierkegaard. I see MacDonald as an existentialist in the Kierkegaardian sense, in the sense that both MacDonald and Kierkegaard were preoccupied with the appalling seriousness of individual human existence before God. They had a sense of the angst and the loneliness, the essential loneliness of being an individual human self, and the tremendous question of how we are to live an authentic human existence as an individual before God. It's in that sense that I see a great parallel between MacDonald's thought and Kierkegaard's thought. And of course, it's possible that I'm completely off base here, but I'm encouraged in that thought at noticing a trend in recent years, or a mini trend, of Kierkegaard scholars who have discovered MacDonald and MacDonald's writings, and who have been very taken with them and very taken with the parallels between Kierkegaard's thought and MacDonald's. And since I'm no Kierkegaard scholar myself, I'm very encouraged by what they've said to believe that I'm not completely off base here, that I may be onto something. Although I have not, finished my own exploration of even Kierkegaard's greatest works, I've been very much captivated in the last few years, in particular by Kierkegaard's great works, Fear and Trembling, and the sickness unto death. And I would like to take those works of Kierkegaard as kind of a conversation partner in my exploration of MacDonald's thoughts on human selfhood. And I would like to start this exploration by focusing on a passage from one of MacDonald's Unspoken Sermons, where you really see that emphasis on human existential angst, existential dread, and the question of what we are to do with our own existence to make it a true, a good thing. And this is a rather long passage, but I believe that it's very important. It's a very useful introduction to MacDonald's thought on human selfhood. And so I'm going to read it largely in its entirety. If I find my position, my consciousness, that of one away from home, nay, of one in some sort of prison, if I find that I can neither rule the world in which I live, nor my own thoughts or desires, that I cannot quiet my passions, order my likings, determine my ends, will my growth, forget when I would, or recall what I forget, that I cannot love where I would, or hate where I would, that I am no king over myself, that I cannot supply my own needs, do not even always know which of my seeming needs are to be supplied, and which treated as impostors. If, in a word, my own being is every way too much for me, if I can neither understand it, be satisfied with it, nor better it, may it not well give me pause, the pause that ends in prayer? When my own scale seems too large for my management, when I reflect that I cannot account for my existence, have had no poorest hand in it, neither, should I not like it, can do anything towards causing it to cease, when I think that I can do nothing to make up to those I love any more than to those I hate, for evils I have done them and sorrows I have caused them, that in my worst moments I disbelieve in my best loathe my worst, that there is in me no wholeness, no unity, that life is not a good to me, for I scorn myself. When I think all or any such things, can it be strange if I think also that surely there ought to be somewhere a being to account for me, one to account for himself and make the around of my existence just, one whose very being accounts and is necessary to account for mine, whose presence is in my being is imperative, not merely to supplement it, but to make to myself my existence a good. For if not rounded in itself, but dependent on that which it knows not and cannot know, it cannot be to itself a good known as a good, a thing of reason and well-being. It will be a life longing for a logos to be the interpretive soul of its cosmos, a logos it cannot have. To know God present, to have the consciousness of God where he is the essential life, must be absolutely necessary to that life. He that is made in the image of God must know him or be desolate. The child must have the Father. Witness the dissatisfaction, yea, desolation of my soul, wretched, alone, unfinished, without him. It cannot act from itself, save in God. Acting from what seems itself without God is no action at all. It is a mere yielding to impulse. All within is disorder and spasm. There is a cry behind me and a voice before. Instincts of betterment tell me I must rise above my present self, perhaps even above all my possible self. I see not how to obey, how to carry them out. I am shut up in a world of consciousness, an unknown I in an unknown world. Surely this world of my unwilled, unchosen, compelled existence cannot be shut out from him, cannot be unknown to him, cannot be impenetrable, impermeable, unpresent to him from whom I am. And he continues, then shall I not think to him? Shall I not tell him my troubles, how he, even he, has troubled me by making me, how unfit I am to be that which I am, that my being is not to me a good thing yet, that I need a law that shall account to me for it in righteousness. Reveal to me how I am to make it a good, how I am to be a good and not an evil. He goes on. There is so much to unpack in that passage. But you see there very clearly his sense of the terror of being an individual alone, an unknown I in an unknown world, and our desperate need to have God account to us for our existence and make it a good thing to ourselves. Teach us how to make it a good thing. And in this, I see him very close to Kierkegaard in his essential concerns. And I know of no evidence that MacDonald read any of Kierkegaard's writings. It's certainly chronologically possible. Kierkegaard was writing his great philosophical works when MacDonald was still a young man. But as intriguing as that would be, I know of no evidence that MacDonald was directly influenced by Kierkegaard. It may have been simply a sharing in the spirit of the times. That's possibly more likely. I think that there's an undeniable affinity. To go deeper into MacDonald's exploration of human selfhood, its diseases, and its possible cure, I would like to explore what I feel like is MacDonald's crowning work of his literary output at the end of his literary career, and that's his great romance, Lilith, his great fantasy. Lilith is an amazing work, and I can't hope to give you anything near an exhaustive or authoritative treatment of it. I'm not going to pretend to. But I've been completely captivated with it, as many other lovers of MacDonald have been. G.K. Chesterton compares it to one of the wild books of the ancient prophets, like the book of Ezekiel, for example. And it does seem at times impenetrable. It certainly cannot be treated as an easy allegory. There's no pat system of interpretation that I think we can impose upon it. And yet, anyone who's really dwelled with Lilith feels that there's something there that is incredibly profound and that it just continues to speak. That in it, MacDonald wrestles with the deep issues of human existence. And he does this by having his protagonist, Mr. Vane, thrust into a situation where he has to confront those riddles himself. First, he makes Mr. Vane almost a blank slate. Here is a young man who has not yet had a chance to define himself or know who he is. He has just come of age and come into his inheritance and has taken up residence in his family's ancestral estate. He has lost his parents early in life and been away at school for most of his youth. He's not really had a chance to do anything in the world or to define himself or to know himself through connection to his human roots. And right at the beginning of the story, he's thrust into another world, which is called the realm of the seven dimensions. And in that world, he's met by an intriguing, enigmatic character, Mr. Raven, who is simultaneously, literally, a raven, a bird, and his great-grandfather's librarian and friend, and the sexton of a vast cemetery, churchyard, and the biblical character Adam, the first human being. And Mr. Raven deliberately approaches and challenges Mr. Vane with a kind of riddling speech and confronts him with the riddle of his own selfhood in really a series of interlocking riddles. And I would categorize them as kind of a sequence of 3 interlocking riddles or challenges. 1, you do not know yourself. 2, you are not at home. And 3, you are not free. And these are really all parts of one riddle. As Mr. Raven says, you yourself are the only riddle. And you have to answer the riddle. He will not let him off, whether willing or not. The 3 riddles are really one, because it's impossible for Mr. Vane to be at home as long as he does not know himself, and it's impossible for him to be free as long as he is not at home. And that profound question of being at home in God's world, being at home among our Father's things, which is impossible unless we are truly at home and at rest in ourselves, is the main plot of the book. The first challenge that Mr. Raven makes to Mr. Vane is, you do not know yourself. And he asks him, tell me, who are you? And Mr. Vane finds himself unable to give an answer to that question. He realizes that it's not enough to say, well, I'm me, of course, or to say, well, I'm Mr. Vane. Because he realizes that a name is just a name. It's just an arbitrary symbol, and it doesn't express his own true essence, who he is, what makes him different than any other person. And he realizes that he doesn't understand or know what it is that makes him an individual. And therefore, he's not at home in himself and cannot be at home in the world. And MacDonald symbolizes this in Lilith, symbolizes Mr. Vane's lack of self-knowledge in Vane's lack of knowledge of his own house, his own home. And this is not the only place in MacDonald's writing where the great old house represents the human self, and its unknownness reflects how we do not know the depths of our own selves. I think, for example, of how G.K. Chesterton talks about this in regard to one of George MacDonald's other great fairy tales, The Princess and the Goblin. And I want to read you a passage from early on in Lilith where Mr. Vane makes that realization. He has just stumbled back into his own attic from the mirror in which he went into the other world. This kind of like the original wardrobe, right? Long before the Chronicles of Narnia. He stumbled back into his own world, into his own attic, and these are his thoughts. Terror seized me, and I fled. Outside the chamber, the wide garret spaces had an uncanny look. They seemed to have long been waiting for something. It had come, and they were waiting again. A shudder went through me on the winding stair. The house had grown strange to me. Something was about to leap upon me from behind. I darted down the spiral, struck against the wall and fell, rose and ran. On the next floor I lost my way, and had gone through several passages a second time ere I found the head of the stair. At the top of the great stair I had come to myself a little. In a few moments I sat recovering my breath in the library. Nothing should ever again make me go up that last terrible stair. The garret at the top of it pervaded the whole house. It sat upon it, threatening to crush me out of it. The brooding brain of the building. It was full of mysterious dwellers, one or other of whom might at any moment appear in the library where I sat. I was nowhere safe. I would sell the dreadful place, in which an aerial portal stood ever open to creatures whose life was other than human. I would purchase a crag in Switzerland and thereon build a wooden nest of 1 story, with never a garret above it, guarded by some grand old peak that would send down nothing worse than a few tons of whelming rock. I knew all the time that my thinking was foolish, and was even aware of a certain undertone of contemptuous humor in it. But suddenly it was checked, and I seemed again to hear the croak of the raven. If I know nothing of my own garret, I thought, what is there to secure me against my own brain? Can I tell what it is even now generating? What thought of it may present me the next moment? What thought it may present me the next moment, the next month, or a year away? What is at the heart of my brain? What is behind my think? Am I there at all? Who? What am I? I could no more answer the question now than when the raven put it to me wherein? Where at? I said, and gave myself up as knowing anything of myself or the universe. That wonderful geography of the self, of the house, where you have the library, possibly the memory, and the place where he can consciously reflect on things, and then the unknown attic or highest place of the house, where it joins on to another world and where influences come in from another world beyond himself, and his realization that he really doesn't know what's beyond and behind his own being supporting it. And I think that's a wonderful picture and statement of the problem of human self as the problem of our self-knowledge and of our necessarily incomplete and inaccurate knowledge of ourselves, that it is impossible for us to come to complete or accurate knowledge of our own selves on our own, that we're simply not designed that way to be able to come to complete or accurate knowledge of ourselves on our own. We need other people. We need intimate relationships with others in order to complete our self-knowledge. Self-knowledge has to be radiated into us from the other, primarily and above all from the other who gave us our being and informs our being and who holds the true idea of ourselves. So that without that, we wake up to realizing that we truly do not know ourselves and are not at home in ourselves, and therefore are not at home in the world and not free to go in and out, as Mr. Raven says. So what do we do about that? What do we do about that lack of true self-knowledge and the problem that it poses to us? That is what I would like to talk about in the next lecture.